Oh, forgot that's not plugged in. Okay, everybody, welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. And today we're going to be looking at the art of Andy Warhol. And more specifically, this painting here, 8 Elvises from 1963. This is one of his most important artworks and also one of the most expensive paintings ever sold. And it was the first Warhol to sell for over $100 million at auction. And at the time, it made him one of only a very small number of artists who had hit that $100 million mark. I know it sounds absolutely insane to even think about spending that much money on a particular piece of art, but we'll talk a little bit about why it's important and who bought it and who sold it, and a little bit about the biography of Andy Warhol. Now, this is probably the 4th or 5th episode we've done on Warhol, so we've covered his biography to a great extent, but maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this very specific era of his career. So let's take a look at the plan for today. We're going to get the image onto the canvas, and then we're going to stain the canvas. I'm actually going to do 2 versions of today's episode. I'm going to paint it as we've done almost every other painting, and then I'm going to show a printmaking technique. So stick around for that. That'll be on the second half of the episode. But yeah, so anyway, but we'll get both canvases started, and then we'll take a break. We'll talk a little bit about Warhol and the 8 Elvises, and then we'll kind of start progressing into the rest of the painting. So I'm hoping probably about 2.5 hours from now, 3 hours, we'll be all done. Again, we're doing 2 different ways to approach this project, so it's going to take a little bit more time. But because this painting is so strange, it does allow us a lot of room to play and to have a little bit of experimentation and fun. So just remember at this point to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, especially if you're watching for the very first time. I really appreciate all the donations that people who've contributed to help support the show for as little as $1. Some people give $1 every episode, for instance, and that really just helps keep all the lights on. Everything you're seeing around me is the result of the generosity of viewers like yourself. Okay, so let's get to the image transfer. I'm just going to move some of the printmaking tools. We'll talk about that when we get there. I've got some specific ones that I want to use for this episode, but let's get this image onto the canvas. Now, I want to show where you can get this image. So there's a Dropbox folder link in the description below. You click on that Dropbox folder, and you're going to go into folder number 121. Now, if you're just watching for the very first time, there's a lot of folders in that folder. The first few ones are our most simple paintings, introductory color mixing tutorials, etc. And then we have some very simple paintings just to kind of get you started. And then you've got over like 150 other paintings that are a little bit more complicated for those people who want to take a little bit more of a challenge on hand, like the Mona Lisa, and here's a whole bunch of great artists from China and Japan. We got superheroes and Peppa Pig, and I mean, lots of Van Gogh, Picasso, all the most famous names, as well as some others maybe you're a little bit less familiar with. And then just as a quick reminder that there's a private Facebook group, and the link to that's in the description below. I encourage you to take a moment to join that group, upload your painting to the group, and it's an awesome community of lots of people who probably are at the same place you are. Some people who are at the very beginning, some people who have been painting for a while, some people who are coming back to painting after a while, right? So I'm going to show you the image transfer. I'm going to just go full screen here, and then we'll just sort of talk about this process. Just making sure here. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Okay. So I'll just talk over top of it. Oh, that's a little thing for me for editing. Okay, So we're just going to take a look. This is I printed off the PDF that was of the outline in the Dropbox folder, and I printed it on my inkjet printer here at home. Nothing fancy, just on a regular piece of paper, and I'm just lining it up pretty much in the middle of my 9x12 sized canvas board. You can get those canvas boards at the dollar store. You can get them at an art supply store for much better. They're much higher quality. In this case, I ordered these off of Amazon, and they are much superior to, they're like the quality you get at your art supply store, but they're a third of the price, right? And then now I'm using some carbon paper. Slide that carbon paper underneath. You can use graphite paper. In this case, this is two-sided carbon paper, so it doesn't really matter which side's up or down. And I'm actually using it to do on the, because we're going to get on the opposite side of this paper, so that I can potentially cut out one of these figures for the printmaking activity at the end. But anyway, most carbon paper, graphite paper, is single-sided, meaning the shiny side that has the carbon that you want to transfer should be on the bottom facing the canvas. Now I'm going to skip through all this because it's kind of redundant. I think you understand what's going on here, because as I draw all over these, you can see, I think I flip it around soon. Oh, let's just, oh, I'm also moving that carbon paper too at times, because sometimes it's a little bit smaller and you might want to just double check that. Oh, you see, I was missing part of the foot there. Let's keep on going. This is an old piece of carbon paper too. I've used it maybe 20 or 30 times. This might be one of the last times I use it, because after a while it stops really working too well. And I double check every once in a while. Oh, look, I missed some eyes. Okay, let's make sure those are there. That's important. So you can see this took about 10 minutes to do, and then we can save the extra little bit, and there we go. So we've got our image now onto the canvas here, and you can see that it's not perfect, but that's okay, because that goes along with the way Warhol approached art in general, where he really let, I guess, transformation or distortion become a big part of his work, and probably almost none more so than this painting itself. So let's move on to the next step here. So our next step is to stain the canvas with some color, and that is what the Italians called, going all the way back to before the Renaissance, over 500 years ago, the Imprimatura. And the Imprimatura is like translated literally is to prime the canvas, but often thought of as like the first layer of paint. And this is something I've been doing for hundreds of episodes now, and I'm going to continue doing that, even though this painting is a little bit different. Just because I love the color of warm yellow that I'm about to apply on the canvas. Now, if you're wondering what warm yellow, I've never painted before, what does that mean? Well, this is the brand of paint that I use, and I'm about to apply this Azo Yellow Deep. Now, you can see there's two yellows, a cool yellow and a warm yellow, cool red and a warm red, and a cool blue and a warm blue. I got white and black. This is what's called a split primary palette, where we have two of each quote-unquote primary color. Now, if you don't have Amsterdam paint, that's okay. You can still do the painting. Here's a few other brands. If there's a brand here you have that's not represented, let me know. This is the colors I would choose if I was using golden paints, which are much higher quality. Liquitex Basics. This is their student grade, but they also have a higher quality paint. Winsor & Newton. The Artist's Loft from Michael's Art Supply. Buzz. Peebo. Holbein. Dyler Rowney. And I think that's it. So you can also watch the one of the very first episodes. I go through and I show pictures of all those paints, and so we talk about that a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to squeeze this warm yellow out onto the canvas, and I'm going to mix it with water. That's a lot of water. I don't think I need quite so much. And then I'm going to take a big brush and stir this up together. This is the only time I ever use water, when I'm painting with acrylics, because we're staining the canvas. And so this right here is basically a stain that we're going to apply onto the gessoed canvas. Most of these almost every single canvas panel comes pre-gessoed, and gesso really absorbs water and paint very well. So it's perfect for this. We don't really want to be adding water to our acrylics in other stages, however, because it is less permanent, and there's other better ways to try to maybe thin the paint if that's what you're using water for. Okay, so let's quickly go over top of this. The other thing too is we'll just want to try to avoid really scrubbing over top of our pencil lines so that we don't smudge them. One of the things I love about this is we'll get a little bit of this yellow on the edge of the painting. And I probably won't paint silver or gray all the way to the edge. So later on, when someone's looking at this painting, probably another artist will look at the side and be like, oh, interesting. It looks like you primed the canvas with a little bit of color, just like Leonardo would have done. And you could say, yes, yes, I did. Thank you for noticing. So it'd be like, that's very impressive for a beginner painter that you did that. I don't really, there's not a lot of even professional artists don't even know about that. And you could say, ah, yes, that's true, but I've been watching art classes on YouTube and learned some actual professional painting techniques. I'm like, oh, clever. So let's do this one. This one's going to be blank because we're going to make a stamp, and we're going to print on top of this. Now, we did something similar when we did the other Andy Warhol print that we did, the silver car crash, the double disaster. I have to check. I think from the same year. I have it out here. We'll take a look. The difference today is that we're going to be using a little bit more professional quality supplies. Last time we used a styrofoam plate that we drew into, and we used some erasers that, just kicking around the house, and I screwed those into a piece of wood and then used those and carved into those. Those all work, well enough for. But if you tried that and you're like, you know what, this is kind of cool, what would be the next step beyond just the basic supplies that we might have kicking around the house? Well, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at how we might do this in a little bit more complex way. Now, you could still do the way that we used last time. It's there in the playlist in the description below. You can always go back and watch and follow that method. But I always want to try to give people as many different options for making a painting as possible. Okay, so there's another one. So 2 yellow Imprimatura primed canvases ready to go. Let's set that to dry. I'll keep this. I like keeping my little outline there just outside of view. Okay. Forgot I was going to glue this. These paintbrushes start to, one of the things that I did when I started painting these, this whole Master Study series, is I wanted to use the least expensive materials possible so that a beginner can go to the dollar store, a discount art supply store, and buy the supplies and get up and running. But that means that sometimes these brushes don't last. I mean, I've used this brush for 250 Imprimaturas, and I think I probably spent $3 on it, right? So that's pretty good. You know, we could easily spend $50 on a really good brush, but it's the Imprimatura. It's just underneath. No one will really see it. So, moving stuff around because I'm trying to... Oh, I wanted to just look at this. This is also from 1963. This is the other Warhol that we did using the stamp technique, which I thought turned out really cool. It's very rudimentary, but it works, right? And I saw a few people on the Facebook group uploading their versions, which also turned out pretty cool. Okay. So, let's move on to the next step here. Let's talk a little bit about who Warhol was and the little bit of backstory behind these paintings. So, let's jump right in here. As I said, we've talked about Warhol and his biography a few times, maybe focusing on slightly different aspects of it, so I'll try to give the basics, and then might not cover everything, obviously, but maybe what we need to know while working on this painting. So Warhol was born in 1928 and dies in 1987 at age 58. And I may have mentioned before that was a surprise. He died younger than expected. He was, for all intents, a healthy person. I think he was getting... It was due to gallbladder surgery here. Yeah, so there was, a routine surgery that did not go well, and he died, I think, in surgery or shortly thereafter while he was in the hospital. And then there was a large lawsuit afterwards because he was not supposed to die. And for a very famous person like that to die unexpectedly is kind of a shock. Warhol, he was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is also where the Andy Warhol Museum and Foundation is. And the Warhol Foundation is one of the great benefactors in the art world. If you look at the back of exhibitions in the United States, on the pamphlet or who sponsored the exhibition, I would say you'd have a pretty good chance of seeing the Warhol Foundation of having sponsored it. Obviously, anytime Warhol is involved, but even beyond that. So he's continued to leave a great legacy even after he died, through the way that his foundation continues to support other artists, especially younger artists. Pittsburgh it certainly was at that time a very hard working class town, like famously where steel was manufactured. The Pittsburgh Steelers football team represents that in their name. So it was like a blue collar town, and it's not surprising that a young boy like Warhol emerges from that environment. It's not, he could come anywhere, but obviously his childhood was pretty difficult. Warhol was gay, whether he probably didn't know that at the time, and we're talking in the 1930s when talking about those kinds of things openly, especially in this type of environment, could get you beat up or worse, right? So definitely there were some struggles in there with identity throughout most of his life, until he moved to New York a little bit later on. I mentioned before as well that Warhol was very close with his mother. His mother lived with Warhol in his apartment in New York City. I'm not exactly sure when she died, but she may have even outlived Warhol or died shortly before he died. So I think that's one of those things that most people don't expect or realize. Warhol was a very social person. A lot of photos of him at Studio 54 in the 1980s, and then he would go out and party all night and then come home and his mother would make him breakfast in the morning, and he would hang out with his mom and go see movies with his mom. So very, very close relationship there. So I think that's something that is very unique to Warhol for sure. It does show also that Warhol was a little bit socially awkward. I mean, he loved his mother, but most people aren't living with their mom, in their late 50s, right? So Warhol was always a little bit different, never quite fit in. And I think I think really beautiful about Warhol is how he really embraced that part of his personality and his life, and almost exaggerated his strangeness and weirdness as he got older, as he kind of really settled into it. And that's something I really admire. He never sort of really hid who he was or tried to be anything different. I'm sure there's some people who I could have a spirited argument with that about, but I just really feel like, what I always encourage my students at the university I teach at, to let the freak flag fly, right? Just be yourself. And that's also sounds, it's like, what does that actually mean? But with Warhol, there's, especially if you watch interviews with Warhol, he is a very evasive person. I'm trying to think of who another person who would be like Warhol that would be in contemporary culture I mean, there's a quality of like Bob Dylan. If you've seen like some interviews with Bob Dylan, is always sort of very mercurial in interviews and answers questions in a very poetic way. Warhol and Dylan did not get along. They had a very intense disagreement over Warhol's relationship with the singer Nico, who fronted the band The Velvet Underground that Andy Warhol basically not formed but kind of managed and made famous. And or sorry, was it Nico? It was Edie Sedgwick. Actually, Edie is our daughter's name and partly named after Edie Sedgwick. Bob Dylan dated Edie Sedgwick and blamed Warhol for creating an environment later where there was open drug use, and Edie became addicted to heroin and died because of her drug use, and Dylan never forgave Warhol. He blamed Warhol for having not protected her, right? Even though Dylan and Sedgwick broke up, there was still a great deal of anger about that. Because Warhol was very hands-off. He had all sorts of different wild personalities around him. He was always really attracted to strange, unique, different people, and a lot of those people would gravitate to the studio. Some who were great, intelligent, super creative artists like himself. And there were also some kind of sleazy, nefarious characters who also made their way into that environment as well. So, anyway, what else should I talk about here? I've mentioned before that Warhol made a name for himself as a designer, as a graphic designer and illustrator, before he started dabbling in painting. And so he became very famous. Literally, I think he was named like the top 50 most important people in New York before he started making any paintings and selling them, because he was making illustrations for Vanity Fair and New York Magazine and all the kind of magazines at the time. He was doing illustrations for like department stores and all that kind of stuff, and he was in demand. And so he had made a comfortable life for himself, and then decided, you know what, I'm going to jump into the art world. And that he was met with quite a lot of resistance, because there were a lot of artists who were like, no, you need to pay the dues before you're allowed to play with the big boys. And you're just some dilettante walking in with a big wallet, figuring you can make yourself buy your way into this. And so, but I think what's interesting is Warhol, and what I admire about that particularly, is that he didn't really care about the gatekeepers in the art world. He was just determined to do what he wanted, despite what the prevailing trends were, and sort of just transcended the hate that was directed towards him, of which there was a lot, especially when he first started exhibiting. One of his very first exhibits was the Campbell's soup can things. And if we go back to what was happening in the art world at the turn of the 1960s, it was not this type of work. It was abstract expressionist painting, right? We looked at Barnett Newman's Voice of Fire, that stripe, and Anna's Light, which were two paintings that were made at the end of the 1960s, which are abstract paintings. That was the kind of stuff that was very popular in New York in the late 1950s. There were a few proto-pop artists like Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, who kind of straddled the abstract and what they started calling new realism before pop became the term, and definitely kind of blazed a trail. But Warhol blew open the door. And so this is one of his first exhibits, was the Campbell Soup Can series, and I think there were like 100 cans. 100 soup cans. So he made a lot of them. Often there were different types of soup. There was tomato and pea soup and beef and barley and all that kind of stuff. So he made lots of different ones. And so that was his... I think it's also interesting that that's how Warhol approached painting. And I think that leads into the discussion for today's artwork, is that Warhol brought the technologies that he was familiar with in the design and illustration world to the painting world. And he wasn't the first person to do that, but he really changed people's attitudes towards that. Again, think of the 1950s. Like, everybody painted big paintings, like big male paintings like Pollock. These are paintings that might be 30 feet long, 10 feet tall, splattered paint, and a guy, you just think of a guy with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth, his shirt off, ripped, splattering paint, one taking a swig of whiskey, and paint splattered all over his face. That's sort of the world that Warhol transformed, and we might still consider we live in the world that Warhol created. Because these soup cans, these were small paintings. He made a lot of them. So even though there's a lot of them going on the walls, they're all individual little pieces, although one might say that they all formed one large series, and he did want them to be sold as one piece. I think they were purchased soon after as one. I think actually there were two purchases, and then the person who owned sort of half of them bought more of them, I think, if I recall. But it sort of blows my mind that he decided, if I'm going to make paintings, I'm going to use the silk screen process to create my paintings rather than hand paint. I mean, there was a short period, and there was a great exhibition at the LA County Museum of Art called Hand Painted Pop, which I strongly recommend if you're interested in that really early stage of art here. So this is the exhibition catalog. Oh, it looks a little bit different than the one I have. But yeah, museum. Oh, it's at Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. So it was MoCA, as it's called. And I'm sure you can find it cheaper than $100. It came out, what, 1992 is when it was released. Anyway, so there was a short amount of time where there were some that were hand painted, but for the most part Warhol used the silkscreen. And if we look at today's painting, the 8 Elvises, this type of a painting would not have been able to have been created, at least the way it is, had he not used that silkscreen process. And this is very early, within that first 2 years or so that he entered into the art world. And 1963, he is cranking stuff out like a machine at that point. I almost think like Warhol, when he faced like conflict or resistance, his instinct was to, rather than retreat and to stop, he would go 10 times more. So when there's all of these people saying what you're making is garbage, it's not art, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to make more of this not art stuff. I'm just going to flood the world with this stuff that I like, and I'm just going to take it on faith that there's somebody out there is going to want it as well. And he was proved right. And I think that's also really inspiring. Like, when faced with an obstacle, is rather than to like kind of shrink back, and is to just keep going and try to bust through that, or to go around and to not sort of to allow those voices of negativity to shut you down. Warhol was an exemplar of someone who is super persistent, maybe too stubborn and obstinate to like listen to those negative criticisms. So the other thing too is that this painting is based on a film still of Elvis Presley. So let's talk just briefly about Elvis. So the image that Warhol used is like on a movie set. While they're making a movie, they're obviously shooting film, but they also usually have a photographer there, maybe once a day, to come on and take photographs documenting the scene, which they can use for publicity, and that they can provide a newspaper who's writing an article about the film, or things that they can print out and can get, the actors can get autographed at film premieres and all that kind of stuff. So this now is all just sent as emails and digital files, but if you go to like some really old used bookstores, sometimes you can find these old film stills as like in prints, like just boxes and boxes of these old things, and you can find them. Obviously there's eBay, I'm sure you can find old film stills there as well. And that's what Warhol did. He found one of these old film stills. This is from a movie from 1960, so it's not as if it was an ancient news. And obviously Elvis Presley was a global icon at this time, was probably the single most famous musician. I mean, this is before the Beatles. I mean, the only other person I think that might have come close would have been maybe Frank Sinatra, of this particular period, right? So Elvis has made a name for himself in the late 1950s as this rock and roll superstar, and then he starts transitioning into doing some films, which we see, Justin Bieber or Justin Timberlake, musicians who decide, you know what, I'm going to take a little bit of and try to do something else that's also creative. And again, Frank Sinatra was a movie star himself, I think maybe before Elvis, but Elvis really was, I don't know if he made that many great movies. You can let me know in the chat there if there's a great Elvis movie out there that that you strongly recommend. I haven't actually seen Flaming Star. I don't know if it's really any good. Is there any review here? Received generally positive reviews. Quentin Tarantino called it a truly great 50s Western, maybe the most brutally violent American Western of its era. Okay, that's interesting. Well, if Tarantino likes it, but Tarantino is, his tastes in movies are very eclectic, to say the least, right? So I'd be interested to watch that, but a lot of other Elvis films are a little bit some are barely above B movies. Pretty silly stuff, because he was just like his music, he started cranking those things out. Let's see, is there anything else I want to mention about this painting before we get going? So the original buyer bought this painting shortly after the exhibition, and then sold it in 2008 for $100 million as a private. Excuse me. She sold it as a private sale for $100 million, and at that time, it was one of the most expensive paintings ever sold. It was the most expensive Warhol painting ever sold at that time until relatively recently. And as you may have heard just a couple weeks ago, there was one that sold for almost $200 million. So lapped this one for sure. But we're not even sure exactly who owns the painting to this day. It was obviously somebody with a lot of money, and that person who bought it hasn't exhibited it. It's I don't know, it could be on a wall in someone's mansion. It could be in a storage place somewhere in Switzerland, where there's a lot of art in these storage vaults because they don't have to pay taxes on it. So we're not clear where it is at this time. It could be buried with the person who bought it, which is what happened to a Van Gogh painting we're going to be doing soon. That's a whole other wild story that we'll get into when we get there. But yeah, this painting, maybe again, let's actually, just before we just move on, let's just maybe take a quick look at the painting itself. I'll let you know that I have done a little bit of Photoshop here. The original looks more like that. So I have added some room to the top and to the bottom, and a little bit more of this leg. Just so if you do want, you can enlarge the picture substantially there. It just, to get it to fit on our 9x12 size canvases, I had to do a little bit of work here. We can also just quickly see that the image obviously is kind of degrading and it's kind of falling apart, because what Warhol was doing as he's silk screening it is he's not cleaning the screen as he's doing these prints, which is traditionally, when you're using a silk screen, if you're doing anything especially of this size, what you would want to do is after each pull, because a silk screen is in fact, let's see if there's a quick image here of silk screening. So the silk screen process, you have this like frame over which there is a screen or fabric stretched over top of it, and then you create an image, which is too long to explain how that happens here, but it's basically like creating a photograph. You go into a dark room and you expose this image with a fluid you've put on your screen, and then you spray it and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, you get the image, and then you ink it up, and you put some ink on it, and then pull this squeegee across, and the ink comes out of the holes that are left over from your image through the transfer process, and that leaves an image on a canvas or a t-shirt or a backpack. So many things around us these days have been, well, a lot of the stuff is now digitally printed, but if you get a t-shirt, probably they're using this silk screen method, because it's still cheaper than getting a big huge machine that can print on fabric. So especially if you're getting your own t-shirt design, they're more likely to use the silk screening process. All right, so here's what one of the screens and the squeegee looks like. and so you're pulling this and it pushes the paint through the screen. So what Warhol would do is he would just screen and then just put it down, screen again, and he would just keep on doing this. And as it's happening, sometimes less and less ink is getting through, and the ink starts to dry through the screen, and it starts to kind of get gummy and blobs form. And when I took printmaking classes at university and undergraduate school, that was the worst thing that you could possibly do, because the whole idea of printmaking is that every print looks exactly like the other ones, right? They're all identical. And so often what artists would do is you might make 30 prints, and then at the end you look at them and you're like, oh, this one, that didn't turn out, that didn't, so these go to the side. And sometimes you tear them up, or you might label them a little bit differently, and then maybe you've got 10 that are perfect, and those would be the addition of 10 that you then sell, because they're all identical. So those are the 10 versions of the, so everyone who buys those is getting the same thing. Warhol, however, someone who was constantly breaking the rules, didn't really care or have any sort of inhibition, I guess, or respect even for these processes, just went ahead and just was like, oh, it's getting a little bit dirty and it's leaving blobs and smears. That's great. I like that. That's wild. Which, if he was in art school and he was doing that, he would fail the class, right? But Warhol he was happy just okay, so here's a close-up of a silk screen. So you put this kind of emulsion on here, and it dries and it clogs up the screen. So when you pull the ink over top of the screen, it doesn't go through these places. But here's where the fabric is still clear. We have openings, and that means when we screen over, the ink is going to go through the screen in these places, but not in the other places where there's no holes, right? That's a good little photo. Here's this person. He's about to, looks like he's going to do get the image transferred onto the screen itself. Somewhere in my parents' basement somewhere is my screen from college when I was there. Look, there's Srikanth Patri says, "Hi, I love your videos. I'm in India, currently taking your drawing classes." Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in and leaving a comment there. That's great. I love that people are still doing that drawing class and still getting so much out of it. I think if you're interested in painting, knowing how to draw is going to serve you very well. And there's Kathy there. Hello there. Happy to be here to learn more. You have a lot of favorites, Michael. You guys are so sweet. What a great group of people out there. Okay, so I've been talking enough. We got a little bit of work ahead, so we can chat as we paint. Let's move to the next step. So traditionally, our next step would be to do a little bit of underpainting to get this painting started. I think what I first want to do actually is just get a little bit of this gray onto the surface, and then we can talk about underpainting. I think I'm just going to go right into the painting. So we may not have a lot of back and forth in this particular episode. Let me see. What colors do we need? So I don't think we need our we're not going to use black. We're going to mix our own dark color. We don't need a cool blue, or sorry, a warm blue or a cool red. I don't think. Famous last words. We're in 10 minutes. I go, oh, yeah. What was I thinking? Okay. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to mix a black. So to mix my black, I'm going to take some cool blue, I'm going to make a big mixture of this because I'm going to use it for the whole painting. So I've got my cool blue and my warm red here. I'm not. Ideally, these are about equal ratios, and we'll put some cool yellow in here. You can see not quite as much, but we don't need quite as much either. So let's mix this all up. And I usually use a paintbrush. I do have a palette knife, but I think we can get away with this here. So when we first start mixing it up, I mean, I love how this looks. We should just go right in there. So it starts out, and it's going to change colors as those colors get absorbed in here. So if we just use the warm red and the cool blue, we mix those together, we're going to get a purple. And which is, I love that purple. It's a bit more of a muted purple. If we want a really nice bright purple, then we would want to use our warm blue and our cool red, because those are right next to each other on the color wheel. They're going to get the color you're probably thinking of. Now, I look at this, and this is kind of a little bit of a brownish purple. So that tells me maybe we'll just zoom out. So basically what I did is I took my warm red and my cool blue and my cool yellow, mixed them together. But the color that we're seeing here probably exists. It's not quite, it'll be probably right around here. So it looks like I actually need maybe even a little bit more cool blue in here and a lot more cool yellow. Because if it's existing here, I need to pull it into this area, right? Because we've got this little bit more of a brownish color. We want a gray, right? Obviously, we can just use black, or you can even buy gray right from the art supply store. But we want, I want to show you that we can mix this with the available colors that we have. Okay, so even there, adding that cool yellow it's making this brown go a little bit more blah. It's taken even more of the saturation out of the colors. It's yanking it into the middle. But I need more cool blue, which is surprising considering how much, I think there was maybe even a little bit more cool blue in there. And that, I probably shouldn't have put that much in at the time here, but we'll see. Okay. It's interesting, you know, it's like when you're making, if you make muffins for, you make 10 muffins, that's, you just follow the recipe on the back, but when you try to make 400 muffins for a whole, you know, gymnasium full of kids, it's like, that can be a little tripling, quadrupling that recipe can be a little tricky. So that looks pretty good for a black right now, but it can be kind of hard to tell. Like probably on camera, you're like, looks great. Oh, it's fine. The secret to determining what that color actually is to add some white. Because the minute we add a little bit of white to these canvases, in fact, I'm going to add just a bit more, that color is going to reveal itself to us. All right, so what I can do is I just put a little bit of white there, and I take my paintbrush and let's mix that. Well, I was almost kind of hoping it wouldn't be perfectly gray, so that I could show you how I could modify that. But let's say I mix this, and it turns a little, it looks a little bit purple, right? That would tell me that we've got, if it was a little bit purple, that would tell me that we're closer down here and we don't have enough yellow. If we mix that color and it looked a little bit green, that would tell us we've got a lot, maybe a lot of this, and we need more red. On the other hand, if it was very brown, it would tell me that we've got a lot of warm red and cool yellow, and we need more blue. So you can just think about where that color seems to be, and then just add the opposite color to pull it back into the neutral core. Okay, so let's make a bigger batch. Ooh, actually, I don't need that much. That's crazy. That's crazy. Because we're going to make our gray background first. So one of the things when we're making a gray, especially if you want to make a lighter gray, it's a lot easier to darken that gray than it is to lighten that gray. Because if I mix this, all that white up, and it is too dark, I'm going to need 5 more tubes of this white to get it to lighten it up. So it's a lot easier, rather than trying to lighten that color, to start with a very subtle mix and then to darken it as we go. So much so that I'm actually just going to take this, clean my brush off, rub some of that excess paint out, and let's try this here. So that's not bad. You can see how it's nice and gray. We can mix that extra little bit in there. Now, if you have silver paint, you could use silver paint for this particular exercise. I do have silver paint here. Do I want to use it? I wasn't planning on using it. Last time I used glitter. I mixed glitter into the paint. Going to take a bit more of that. You can see there's a little bit of red on there. It wasn't totally mixed in, but when it's at this much white, it's going to disappear pretty much. Now, I'm also going to add a little bit of matte medium. Matte medium is clear paint. It's exactly what's inside this tube of paint, except this tube of paint also has yellow pigment, like a powder that was made in a laboratory, and then they mix them together. So I'm going to use this matte medium, which is going to thin the paint out. And because I painted these things this warm yellow, I want to preserve that. If you didn't paint any warm yellow, then you could probably just get away with painting this color directly over top, and you'd be very happy with yourself. But I like that warm yellow, and I painted it there for a reason. The other thing is, if I paint my white, that gray that I mixed before, right over top here, I'm going to lose all of the detail. It's like, what would be the purpose of doing this? Because it would just wipe all of those pencil lines out. Right? So adding a little bit of that matte medium is going to make it a little bit more transparent. In fact, I'm going to paint this version first because it's blank. And that's just going to allow me to kind of see how this is working, because I don't have to worry about covering or losing any detail in this particular process. And actually, I'm just going to switch back to my larger paintbrush. I'm thinking to myself that this would have been a little bit too opaque, a little bit too solid of a gray, and I would have lost a lot of those pencil lines, which would have just made my life just a little bit more difficult than I probably would like. Who wants to, I mean, everybody likes a good challenge now and then, but you know, I think most people watching are wanting to have fun and learn something, not to be overly stressed, right? So the more of those pencil lines show through, I think it's going to make your life easy. You'll also notice when I'm doing this type of thing, I often will do exactly what I'm doing right here, kind of going up and down, left to right. And what that helps to do is it helps to get the paint into the weave of the canvas. because sometimes it gets in there in one direction but not in the other. And I always use the example of when we're doing a large surface like this, it's like putting butter on a waffle, right? And as if anyone who's ever had a waffle knows and who's tried to butter it, half the butter comes off of your knife on the first little pocket on that waffle. So there's a few little places where it's still a little bit transparent. I don't mind that right now. I still see a little bit of yellow on these edges here. We'll let this dry for a few minutes and then we'll see. It might be something I want to do another coat on, or I might decide, you know what, I think it's fine. So now that we've learned how this behaves, I want to add more matte medium into my color. I want to thin it out even more because I can always do a second coat of this paint if I feel like it wasn't solid enough. But it's, once you've got that color on there, you got to kind of live with it. So this, we'll see. So even then, that's pretty opaque. So the image currently has almost disappeared. I'm working kind of frantically to get as much paint on here as possible. And then once it's on there, I'm gonna kind of almost scrape some of it off, but I want all that paint on there first. Okay, so let's just look. I have lost a lot of information on here, so let's just do a quick little wipe away. I'm just going to take some of this paint off, and then let's try to smear what remains on here. Now, as this dries, this paint will probably get a little bit more transparent. So you can probably see there's a little bit areas where it's a little bit more yellow here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow dry both of these, and then we'll just take a look and just see how they turned out. If anything, I might add a little bit more gray around the outer edges here. So I'm just going to mute for a moment. Okay, so you can see that it's gotten a little bit thinner and I can see more details, just enough in these faces. I am just going to give a little bit more, and to do this I'm going to take some of my matte medium. I'm putting it there separately. Let's take a little bit of this gray and mix it here. So this paint is now going to be super transparent, right? Because now we already had made it a bit transparent. Now we added probably more than half of this matte medium here. So, sorry, that's loud. Ooh, I didn't even think that it could be a little bit different color. I think as it dries, it will be fine, but that was, didn't even think about that. This should be, we just painted it, so I think it'll be fine. We just want to maybe bring it up into, so now I'm just sort of painting in between some of these heads where it was a little bit lighter. Okay, I'm actually going to go back into and get some of my darker, more solid, less opaque gray, I mean, and put those in some of those areas around the edges. Okay, I think that's going to be good. We can paint with this. I'm just going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to take, let's take some of this. Again, you know, if we just think about like in the spirit of Warhol, he would not care the least if this canvas had a little bit of unevenness of the way that the paint was applied to. So that's another whole reason that I've selected Warhol. I mean, this is part of the most expensive paintings in history series that we're doing, but I really wanted to, I really like teaching printmaking through the art of Andy Warhol, because if we make a mistake, if we're trying to use, you know, another great printer to study from and it doesn't turn out well, then we feel like we failed. With Warhol, if it doesn't turn out the way we wanted, it is like right in the spirit of Warhol, because Warhol would have been, that's great, I like it, I love it, look how messed up it looks, that's fantastic, how did you do that? Which is very Warholian. That's how Warhol kind of talked, and some people think it was all a big put on, that he didn't really believe a lot of the things he said. I'm quite inclined to take him at face value, and I think that's really very much who he was as a person. A bit of an oddball kind of character. I have a tab open here. I don't think I'm going to go to it, but just there's a new series, I think a documentary series coming out all about the I think it's called the Andy Warhol Diaries, and so I'm really interested to see that. Apparently they got some sort of artificial intelligence technology to read the entries into his diaries, which you can buy. It's called the Andy Warhol Diaries. And what's really fascinating about the Warhol Diaries is that Warhol would, I think it was every morning from kind of like the late 1970s to early 80s, he would wake up in the morning and then call his assistant, I think it was his assistant, and leave a message detailing the previous day as his journal, and then they would type that up for him. I think they did that maybe even after he died. They went through all those tapes and just started collecting all of that material. Or maybe they did it for him for the next day so they'd all be ready. I'm not sure. Okay. So I just wanted to clean that surface up. You know that I kind of like having least cluttered surface, and all that stuff sort of gets in my way. I want to just blow dry this just one last quick time here. Maria says this documentary is so great. So I didn't realize, is it out already? The Warhol doc. Let me see. I just want to see. So it's a 6-part series here. Andy Warhol Diaries is out already. It must be. Oh, it was on March 9th. I didn't realize it's already been out for a few months. Okay. Wow. That's interesting. Marie says there's also a movie about another artist, Margaret Keane. Big Eyes. Is that the one you're thinking about, Maria? We're going to be doing a Margaret Keane painting in the fall. I don't know exactly what date, but she's also a very famous artist for the way that she painted all these people with huge eyes. Very cool. So there's this I can't wait to see it, and there's a little trailer. I'm not going to play it for you, but sounds like it would be great. Okay. So let's... Typically we do a little bit of work in the background. I think we're just going to move right to the foreground, and we're just going to start painting the Elvises. And just thinking of Warhol, like I mean, Elvis was alive when this happened, right? Elvis died in 1977, so you know, Elvis probably would have been aware of this painting. He probably owned, well, I don't know if him and Warhol would have got along very well, now that I think about it. But he might have bought one of the pieces. I mean, Warhol was smart enough, he knew, like, hey, if I make paintings of famous people, people will want those paintings, right? Warhol really helped to establish the celebrity culture. For better or worse, we can talk about the Kardashians and people who seem famous for maybe no particular reason. And part of that is a bit of the Warhol effect. Warhol elevated people who were a week before were working in restaurants and bars to celebrities, at least within his sort of circle and the New York kind of party scene. He elevated them into kind of huge celebrities. So what do I want to do? Okay, so let's start painting this painting. And really, I mean, this is a challenge because it's such a weird painting to try to do a very traditional approach. So actually, I just want to take a look here and just think about where I want to start. I think the way that I'm going to paint this painting, I've mixed up a quite sizable amount of black. So I'm going to use my glazing fluid, which is going to allow this paint to get a little bit thinner, a little bit more transparent. That way I can kind of build up to the darkest darks, right? Because to paint, like, I can just use my black to paint his belt and the hair. Yeah, no problem. But how am I going to paint, like, these pants or, like, the jacket, right? I could use a dry brush technique, which would sort of make a little bit of sense. And we could actually probably do that painting faster using a dry brush technique. But I'm going to use some glazing fluid in the same way we did a painting of the Ramones a few weeks ago, which is another was a rock band from New York, and we did this same sort of thing. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm actually going to paint. Ooh, Elvis dancing for a second there. I think what I'm going to do is paint all the darkest areas first. That's what I'll do. And then I'm going to come back and we'll do the lighter stuff second. So you can see, thinking here on my feet to try to make this work. So let's, this feels like it could be a tad bit dark, but I'm not going to bother lightening it up. That would be crazy. So let's dive down here. I'm going to start in the far top left. It's the left part of my canvas here. I wonder if that will focus on that. Okay, good. So let's go to this view. I might have to just back it out just a bit here. So we have comparable sizes. And then let's move that like. So you can see there's that that seems much more prominent, that little bit of yellow. So I'm going to take my black. You know what? Actually, I'm going to add a little bit of my glazing fluid. It makes it obviously transparent, but it also makes it a little bit more fluid-like. So I'm going to paint with this, and then every once in a while I'm going to maybe dip into that as I go. Okay, so I want a fairly sharp point, because we're going to be doing a lot of detail work for really this episode here. So what's the best way here? That doesn't really look like Elvis at all, but that's okay. Especially when they get all kind of together on the canvas. We'll see. We'll start it out like that. Obviously we can modify things as we go. And the fact that he's holding this like handgun is, you know, it's pretty hard to even tell that he's doing that, right? So I might paint a few things that are technically not there, just to try to make this make sense. And you know, now that I think about it, it probably would have been a good idea, rather than to start right here with Elvis's face, to actually paint a little bit further down, like start in the middle where it's going to get all jumbled up. So, because I always think like the first little bit of any painting is just trying to figure things out and get your feet wet. So we can always, you know, if let's say part of this painting isn't turning out the way we want, we can always just kind of cover it up. We can even put another Elvis right on top of here. Should we just start with the next one right over top? So you know what, I might leave them in that kind of state at this point here. And just start kind of wedging my way into this painting in as loose of a way as possible here. So, you know, I'll just say right at this exact moment, the way that I feel is not great. It's like, oh, this may not yield the results that I want. But I'm gonna, let's, you know, so part of me is like, okay, let's just bail on this and let's just go right to the next step. But you know what? That happens in every painting that I've ever made. So, you know, one thing I can use because it's got that a little bit of like a slow dry quality in the glazing fluid, it will allow me to wipe things away. So one of the things that sometimes happens when I get a little discouraged is I start getting more and more kind of sloppy and which is kind of like what's happening here. So we'll see. I'm not sure. We've done a few faces, 3 of 8. Let's just kind of go down to some legs. Oops. Nope. Okay. So just paint these folds in kind of quickly. mean, as I'm working on this, I'm thinking, okay, the likelihood that this is going to turn out the way that I want is just about 0 at this point. So that'll allow me to kind of maybe have a little bit of fun with this then, because I think, okay, well, if it's not going to be what I want it to be, then what can it be? What is it that I've wanted to do that I haven't done? So I'm just going to take my glazing fluid and go for a fairly thin mixture, and I'm gonna paint in a bunch of outlines. So this is kind of like what I typically do in some other paintings, but now I'm just gonna do this quicker. As you might see, I don't really have the patience to get into all of these little details as I typically do in a lot of other paintings. But I'm not going to give up hope on it just yet. I'm going to finish the painting. We'll see what I can do, if I can salvage it and turn it into something. Yeah, Kathy's talking about that in that movie Big Eyes, they used her husband's name originally to sell the paintings, because at the time, in the 40s and 50s, no one would take a female artist seriously. But there was quite a lot of, when she eventually tried to come out as the real artist, there was a lot of resistance to that. Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, three more of these legs. I'm also feeling like this gray that I put down was too opaque, and it's maybe not even that. It's the carbon paper that I was using, I think, was not as dark as it could have been, because I'd used it so many times. And sometimes that's not a problem. In this case, though, it is a bit of an issue. Okay, I don't know how many legs are in here. I think I got 9 legs. I'm putting a few too many. I got a lot of, I guess, left legs. I need more right legs. And maybe I'll have a lot of Elvises here. Maybe I'll fill this whole thing up. I don't know. But you can see I've lightened this up considerably. That way it's going to give me some flexibility. Later on I can darken things if I kind of, if I want. Like this particular area on the far right side of the painting is going to become mostly just a big mess of a blob of forms, right? So I got enough heads on here now. This what I just painted there is pretty funny. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I need 2 more kind of pistils in here. Okay, so as I'm going here, I'm thinking, let's, I'm gonna have some fun with this one. Let's... because it's gonna be a big mess here. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4. One over here. This also kind of reminds me, I think we talked about like abstract painting. We were talking about Barnett Newman the other day, and one of the techniques I used for my own abstract painting when I was doing abstract painting in college for a short period of time was to take an image and then to allow it to kind of, I would sort of trace it over and over and over again and allow it to kind of fall apart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I just need one more. And then I paint all over top of it. And so let's just take, I'll just show you where I'm at right here. And you can even see I got a little bit of my handprint down there. I'll try to clean it off, but if it doesn't work... Oh, I was able to get a little bit of that off. I'm actually surprised that all that came off quite well. You just have to be careful you don't actually wipe away the gray paint there. So... let's look at the original and just think about how I might progress now that I've gotten myself at this situation. Okay. So what would be, I kind of like, okay, so I started this painting trying to really do the painting exactly as it was. And I realized very quickly that there's not enough information there for me. A lot of it is obscured. So I think I'm going to paint this in a very brushy style. Like, I kind of, like, as I progressed in here, I started to kind of feel like, oh, I like the way that looks. So I think I'm going to continue in almost like an impressionist kind of very painterly type of a fashion here. And so I'm going to work on this for, let's see where I go in another half hour. And then from there, I'm going to then transition to working on the what will be kind of like a lino cut here. So let me see. Three, four, five, six, seven. I'm missing a leg, and I think there's another one somewhere in here. Let's just throw this guy. I think it almost makes sense to do them like the same brush stroke a bunch of times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Why is it so hard to count all of a sudden? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I like that. It seems this is making sense to me. Like, it almost makes me think I should have done each thing just like this. Like, all, I mean, I kind of did a little bit of that, but this, like, the same brushstroke over and over and over again, I think works. 2, 3, or no, that's 4, 6, 7, 8. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oops. I guess I could do that on all of these. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's this one is gonna wreck my brain. This one's a little tricky. Okay, so let's get this other dark shoe here. I mean, there's like, as I'm painting this, this seems super absurd as an exercise. 1, 2, 3. I mean, obviously, if I just sat down, we could do this. If I spend unlimited time, I would easily do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But it would just require such a level of patience that I don't know if I actually have. Let's continue. I'm kind of liking, it's weird and strange, but I'm kind of digging the way that it's unfolding. And as I always say, like, that's, you know, when it comes to paintings, every painting has an up and down. There's always times where a painting feels like it's working well, and then it suddenly kind of collapses on you, and then you can kind of rescue it. Rescuing a painting, I tell you, is like one of the most satisfying things that you can ever do in life. Like when you've got a painting and it is not working, and you stick with it and pull it out of the muck, it just feels like you're a superhero. So I'm curious if anyone is painting this painting at all, or is everyone sort of watching and going like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do this one. At least like this, or maybe people are waiting until we talk about the printmaking technique. Like, as I'm working on this, I start thinking, like, I kind of, the idea of this as being some sort of monster of some kind that becomes kind of appealing to me, to try to, like, you know, this claw-like thing here that I've kind of formed here, which is not really, you know, very evident here, because he's mostly just got, I think, his hand or his thumb on the loop of, or I guess not, it's just sort of floating, hovering maybe over the other holster. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, should wait for a lot of that to dry. I mean, let's just continue on. Let's go do the faces, and then we'll see where we're at, and if this is something we want to spend more time on. So I just want to blow dry this. Okay, let's dive in. I'm going to work on the face again in maybe this area where it's a little bit muddy. That way I can kind of get away with things if they're not turning out the way I want. So let's actually, almost makes me think about maybe I should use a Posca pen. You know what? I'm just going to continue using the paintbrush here. So I'm not, especially with a painting like this where it's so confused, I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about how much it looks like Elvis Presley. I am going to do an actual painting on Elvis in a couple of weeks, to coincide with the release of the new Elvis biography film by Baz Luhrmann, the great he's Australian director who did I guess most recently Great Gatsby and Romeo and Juliet and such. So we'll do an actual portrait of Elvis that looks like Elvis eventually. So this is mostly just kind of a fun way for me of exploring this artist, right? I mean, I find it kind of funny how they all look a little bit different. I mean, it starts to kind of look like a little bit of like a lineup of people in, in a police lineup or something. And as I go, I'm getting kind of lazy again, and I mean, there's barely really any likeness here whatsoever, obviously, right? Okay. Let's take a look here. I mean, there's it's definitely better. Do I think this is one of the best things I've ever done? Absolutely not. No, for sure. But it is becoming something. I'm thinking to myself, is it time to just move on? I think it is. I just want to see if maybe there's a few little extra lines that I can put in here. I mean, Paula's painting along as usual. Awesome, Paula. I think I'm just gonna walk away at this point. I mean, yeah, I guess, for some people this would be a disaster. It's not, it's not the most pleasant experience to have a painting you're working on not really turn out the way you want, but it's also like a great learning experience. Like, this tells me here that doing a painting like this does not really tap into my natural abilities. It's maybe way more complicated than I expected it to be, and so those kind of things are good to learn, because that can help me in the future when I'm thinking about creating a painting. I can kind of plan for that, knowing what this experience has already taught me. Okay, so I'm going to move this one to the side, and we'll do a little wrap up on that. And maybe after working on this next part, I'll come to some sort of realization, and that will be helpful for maybe there's some other detail I'll add there. Let's move this out of the way. And I'll move this. Transitioning to a whole different type of tool here. Okay. So I'm just going to call this Foreground Pass number 2, so that when I'm doing the timestamps in these episodes, it'll make it easier for me to find. So let's get these materials all ready here. Okay, so we're going to do something completely different now. What we're going to do is we are going to use a printmaking technique, and we're going to try to carve out this figure onto a rubber pad here. So these are, this block here is what? It's a 9 by 11 block, or 22 by 29 centimeters. And it's, how would you say, that's like what, 3 centimeters wide, or maybe 3/16 of an inch, about just over 1/4 of an inch maybe. So it's fairly substantial. This cost, I think, about $25 at a local art supply store. And even though I'm not going to carve all of these figures, I'm just going to carve out one of them. So I'm not going to use this whole block. It's, you know, just like anything when we're using, you know, the larger size that you buy, you get a bit of a saving. So if I want to do more of these in the future, then I'll still have a substantial amount of this left. Okay. So we're just going to use a small section of it, and I want to try using, so this material is specifically made for this purpose. As you recall, previously we created our own stamp under a pile of debris back there. I want to see if I can use my carbon paper on this. I did buy some of this charcoal carbon paper. Will this leave a mark? Not that well. Let's see this graphite paper. Not at all. And this is some of the stuff at the art supply store they said might work. This is white charcoal. So charcoal is different than carbon paper. Will it work? No. It doesn't work. Okay, that's all right. I suspect there is a process we could use that uses acetone, but I don't want to do that inside my studio because that is pretty expensive. Paul says, is that the same person 8 times? Yes, Paula, that is Elvis Presley, the musician, 8 times. And that's why this painting is called 8 Elvises. So which one? Let's cut this out. So, and we're going to be using this side to carve into, so when it prints, it'll print right side up. But I'll just cut it from. So what we're doing here is we're going to reproduce all of the wrinkles and all that kind of stuff as we carve into it, into this block. But this is going to help us just get the general scale of things in here. And we can use a Sharpie to help. You can see I can draw with a pencil. That's so bizarre that the carbon paper doesn't work. Maybe I need a new piece of carbon paper. I feel like that ship has sailed now. Actually, I just want to test it. I'm not going to use it, but. So this here is the carbon paper that is in the description below that you can buy from Amazon. So let's just see if this. Oh, that's the, of course it's not going to work on that side. It does a little. Okay. Do I want to? This would certainly speed this process up. Okay, so let's. You know what? Let's just. I'm gonna just trace around this. And I'm actually going to use a Sharpie. You know what, that's... So I'll have all of this extra material here to use for making stamps for our daughter or something like that in the future. And as I said, it's important that we do this backwards, because if we do it this way, if I print it, if I do it like this and I print, it'll look that way when it's printed, right? You just have to think about that being down. Whereas now, if I do it this way, when it prints, it's going to look quote-unquote right side up. Okay. So I'm going to keep it in this block as I work for various different reasons. One of which is it's easier when this is a nice solid block. It's going to be a lot easier, to carve into than it will be if I'm trying to do this and this thing is really small and this leg keeps flopping around and stuff. They're pretty thick and substantial, but it's still a bit of a pain, right? So now I'm going to sketch this in. I'm going to start with, in fact, you know what, let's go to flipped it around. Oops. Oh, come on. Okay. Oh. actually, you know what makes even more sense to me is to do this with my own one here. There we go. Okay, so that's all I really need to kind of get started. So then once we've got our image sketched out onto here, I'm going to now use some carving tools to create this image. Now you can buy, I think this is by Speedball 2, and Speedball is probably they're the main manufacturer of printmaking equipment out there. They make the ink, of which I should have had already. Or did I put it in here? Shoot, I usually have it right there. Okay. Right here. So we like the Speedball ink, printmaking ink, the carving tools, and the pad are all from Speedball. So the other thing to think about is everywhere that I don't carve is going to be black. Everywhere that I do carve will be white or the color of my canvas, right? Because there's not going to be anything there. So I'm going to go around the outside edge here. I'm going to do this kind of quickly. I'm not going to try to make this the best thing possible. This is just a demonstration. I want to try to carve this out. Let's say, how much time do I want to spend on this? Maybe 20 minutes at tops. Because we just want to see how this effect can actually work, right? So I'm trying to keep this line kind of wavy to give the effect of like those pants. Or like the wrinkles in these pants. Now just going back around. I will cut a lot of this out. I'll probably try to preserve this triangular shape here so that I can use it for something else. Right, so even just like that last little bit here, I kind of did a very straight line to emphasize that this is something that is, you know, not as organic as these pants are, right? Those pants, the flowing fabric, I think it's important that they look kind of wavy to capture that that it's a different material. The other thing too, they make thinner pads than this that are maybe a little bit cheaper. The one thing with those really thin pads is you got to be careful that you're not too heavy-handed, otherwise you may accidentally go right through, which is not the end of the world, but it can just make your life a little bit tricky. Okay, so that's a good starting place. Let's now, I'm gonna maybe carve a few. Okay, so we just have, again, remember that where this is, like, the untouched parts are going to be black. The places I do touch are going to be, there's not going to be any ink on those. So I'm going to now kind of carve around. So this is kind of tricky for many people to kind of comprehend, because we're sort of having to work in reverse. So a bunch of these lines are going to be very subtle. We can emphasize things by carving, like, so if I carve a deep line like that, there's going to be no ink on there. If we create more shallow ones, we'll be able to, you might even see just a little bit of that touch the canvas. The other thing too, when you do printmaking, you often do test prints quite a lot. So you kind of get a little bit done, and then you ink it up, and then you just see how it's progressing, and you go, ah, okay, that's cool. That's what I was hoping would happen. It's cool. I haven't done something like this in probably 20 years. So I also use these episodes to kind of selfishly explore some techniques that I haven't done in a long time. So here, this is going to create a lot of wrinkles. Wrinkles that really aren't in the original. Or they're there, but very, very subtle. I'm liking the way that looks. So I think that's going to make some really interesting patterns on his pant legs. So if I keep this shape dark here, or just intact, that's going to go black, right? I just realized this is his belt, and we won't have the belt buckle there, which is a big part of this artwork, so that happened. But it's okay. So some people love doing this thing. One of my best friends, who was one of the best men at my wedding, he does this all the time. This is his deal. Like, he makes... Actually, I've got a number of friends that do printmaking like this. So basically, this is... You can call it like a lino cut, or it's very similar to woodblock printing. Because people will literally carve into linoleum to do this kind of thing. That looks like it's just going to be a couple of fingers. That's going to look kind of funny. Oh well. So you can see that I'm working my way slowly up to the face, because that's the part that, you know, it's important to this work, and this gives me an opportunity to kind of get my feet wet again and work on just remembering some muscle memory here of how to use this material. So, you know, most of the time when I'm doing anything, I always think, okay, let's save maybe sometimes the most complicated thing for last, so that ideally by the time I get there, I've sort of got my confidence up. I've worked out any kind of maybe issues. The good thing about this sort of thing is once we start printing, it's going to go real quick. So that's the kind of one thing with like printmaking, is it's a lot like performance in that there's all this preparation and then boom, it happens, and we are Let's see if that gun just worked. So I wonder, you know what, I might just print this directly onto the canvas to start, inside one of the areas that is maybe where there's a lot of overlapping lines. And then we'll see if it turned out the way we wanted. So we want underneath his chin to remain solid. So we want to cut out almost everything here on the face, otherwise it's just going to be a big black blob. So we'll be done here in about 2 minutes, and then we'll start printing. Just a couple little divots in the hair. Those will probably still print, but might just be a little bit lighter. Did I just trim off the bottom of that nose a bit? Well, it is what it is. I think there'll be a little bit of nose, but who knows? Who knows about the nose? Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. I mean, we won't really know until we do it what it looks like. So I'm just going to do one last kind of carve around the outside edge. And then I'm going to cut this block out from this much larger original shape here. It is kind of cool, all these little things, the residue left over is pretty funky. I don't know if there's what the use for it could possibly be. I'm sure there's an art student somewhere that's done something with it. I think when you're in art school, you start looking at the dumpster differently than everybody else, because especially towards the end of semester when you spent all your money on booze and you're like, oh, I gotta make a sculpture by Friday and I can't afford whatever. Oh, we're supposed to buy new cardboard. Okay, let's see if I can find any cardboard from the liquor store or something, or you know, and then you're competing with everybody looking for moving boxes. But you know, honestly, some of those projects are the best ones because you have to be really resourceful. Eli Cosmos Waters, is that, or Lai Cosmos Waters says, "This is really cool to watch. Thank you for sharing." My pleasure. So you know, it's going to be so interesting to see how well this turns out, and let's see if we can cut this block out here. You also want to be careful you don't tear this material, because especially when it gets thinner, I've seen it tear on people, and there is solutions for that, but it's not not fun. Okay, so that's going to be our stamp. Yeah, let's trim this out, I guess, as well. I was going to leave a bit of an edge here, and then as I started cutting it, it was like, why am I doing this? So let's just come right back here. I mean, generally, it's a good idea to have, because this is now kind of gets a little bit more wobbly when it's in this kind of a state, right? And ideally, many people want to keep this as an actual block. In fact, at your art supply store, I'm sure you can also find this material glued to a wooden block so that it retains its kind of structural integrity. Okay. So let's do a couple of seconds of cleanup here. Move all of this away. I think unless there's something dramatically different about this that I don't like, I'll probably just print the whole thing. Maybe I'll keep something like that. Maybe I can use that little chunk left over. All the rest of this is just going to go in the garbage. Okay, now we're going to use actual speedball ink. I was thinking about using the acrylic paint, but I just know it's not going to kind of turn out the way that I want. So we'll ink it up, and then we're just going to print it here. You can see this is why it's nice to have a block, because now I might get my fingers all over this. So I think what I'm going to do is just make a little tab for myself here. This way it's going to make it kind of a little bit easier for me to pick up, so I don't have to hold it on the edge like that and then get my fingerprints all over. It does look like some of the Sharpie is coming off a little bit, but this will be a little bit of a fun experiment. I'm gonna print. Let's get. Where's my sheet? Okay. I'm just going to use this top of a container for this. I do have some glass sheets that I've used many times, but we'll just do this kind of quick and dirty. You want a nice smooth surface. Let's do this. I don't know why I put that much. I certainly don't need that much. When we're inking up, we want even and not like an excessive amount of this ink. Otherwise, it's just going to fill in all those gaps, and we're just going to have a blob. So that's a lot of ink. So we don't want to put that on there like this. So then I'm going to take it and so what I'm doing is I'm rolling it. I'm trying to get it all over. All right, so there's still quite a lot on there. So let's just try to maybe get a little bit off. That's pretty good. So it doesn't quite have the big gloppiness that it once had. The more even that roller is, the better. So let's we need some paper or newsprint for this. I always keep these like paper around so that I can do this. If I need to make a mess, I've got paper ready for it. So let's just take a little bit out. Here. The other thing I like to do this inside a piece of paper, and then I can always close this up so it doesn't make too much of a mess. So let's do one of these at a time. The other thing, by using this tape like this, it's going to make it, if I put like a nail or something, imagine how much more difficult it would be to ink that block up. Let's zoom back in here. Ooh, it's magic. Isn't it magic? Make sure everything's inked. Okay. And now let's think of where we want to put this. So make sure that's in focus. So I was going to maybe start with one right kind of in the middle here. That way, if it doesn't turn out, then I can always go and do a little bit more elsewhere. If I need to carve it, or it turns into a blob, it won't be so bad. See, this is shifting a little bit, which is why it might have been nice to have preserved that, but I would have had to carve out all its space between there. Let's go to... Oops, let's go... Okay, you ready? Ta-da! Well, that's pretty funny. It's obviously, we'll see. So Warhol would now just take this and do it again, right over top. So we'll do another one right next to it, or let's do one kind of right there. So this could be, there's going to be a lot less ink on it here because we just printed with it. So let's see. Oops, let's go this way. Let's do one more. We'll do one more right here because these ones on the outside edge were really faint. So really want to try to get even pressure on these, and we obviously don't want this to slip or slide at all. Okay. Now you can see where a little bit of this edge came up, right, and made that little spot there, which may or may not have, I think I carved it, but not quite as much, so I'm actually just going to cut that away. Oh, and there's the same kind of thing here. There's little bits by the feet. I'm just going to use a pair of scissors to trim that off. Okay. So that's good. He looks pretty sad, right? Sad Elvis. So let's ink this up again. All right, get some new ink on here. Get that roller turning. That looks good. Let's get that in the middle. 1 second here. Now the other thing too, you would probably, if you're going to do a lot of this, you would want to clean this and to keep it, because paint is going to start building up as it dries. It gets kind of a little bit sticky, and it's not going to make for the best results. So, but again, Warhol didn't care about that. These feet are moving around on me a bit, which tells me that this material, there might also be maybe too much ink under there because it's sliding around. All right, you could really see how it blobbed up by that eye. Let's do another one here. We got 4, so we need 4 more here. Actually, do I want to do... I'm going to do one here, kind of over, right in between, overlapping these guys. And I've already put it down. It's a little bit crooked, but that's okay. Okay, I'm going to ink it up again. So there's a lot of ink on here. I think this might be the last time I ink it up, and as I go back towards the left, I'm just going to actually, you know what? I think he does this on the far left here. So let's, in fact, even that leg goes off the canvas. So I'm going to start here. Okay. Oh, that's different. Right, I guess I just didn't press in that area. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So one more. There we go. Okay. So we still have this. What is a good idea is when you're done this kind of thing is to wash this off. So let's just do that, and then we'll wrap up. Because I want to show how relatively easy it can be to clean these materials. So just a little bucket here. Now this works a lot better with a little bit of soap, which I should have brought over from the sink. Now you also obviously want to be, if you're going to do a lot of prints, you want to be quite careful that you don't accidentally, you know, wreck your stamp here, or your print, your original here. Otherwise, you know, because if you're too aggressive cleaning it, you might actually, you know, tear some of the details that you've worked so hard to create. So. But you can see as we go, more and more that ink just starts coming off. And if you do this well enough, you'll have a nice clean block that you can use to print dozens and dozens of times. And this is pretty resilient. Like, unless you're pushing really, really hard, or you're making thousands of prints, it's going to look pretty similar from the first print all the way to the final one. Which, you know, this is a pretty cool way of making people like a Christmas cards, or Thanksgiving, you know, wedding invitations, or party, summer party, or something. Like, this is a cool way to create something that could be literally an artwork as well as a as just an invitation or something, right? So there's still more ink that I'd want to clean out of it, so I can just let this sit in here and soak, and when I'm all done today, I'll go and just get some soap and kind of flush all that out. You can also use a toothbrush to help. Okay, so let's wrap up here. Wickstar says, I just started taking your drawing classes. They're great. I still suck, but they are really fun and informative. Just popping in to say thanks for the content. Thank you so much for saying that. That's so cool. And Yasin says, yeah, hey, your videos are really, really, really nice. Please keep doing them. Thank you so much. God bless you. Wow, cool. A lot of new people popping in for the stream today. That's great. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. We're going to take a look at the paintings, the two versions. We'll look at them side by side with the original, and we can kind of talk about what worked and what didn't. Because not everything is always a success. Often art is a learning experience, and the secrets to the next work lie in the one that we were just working on, and even in what wasn't working. And the perfect example of this is Andy Warhol. Okay, so just as a quick reminder to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, just like all these new people here in the chat who've been doing the drawing class. If you want to leave a donation, there's the PayPal link. There's a super chat function right next to where you leave a comment in the during the live stream. You'll see a little $sign there. And if you want to contact me through the Facebook group or my email, all of those links are in the description below. Okay, so there is the original great artwork by the master, and here is, let's go back to the painted version that I did. Ooh, that's kind of scary, isn't it? That's it looks sort of like some crazy Marvel character or somebody blurring or something. So again, this one was a bit of a struggle. I saw almost immediately as I started to paint it that this was going to be way more challenging than I thought. I mean, obviously repeating the same face 8 times is really difficult. And as soon as I was sort of halfway done the first person here when I started to kind of lose patience. I could have done a much better job, but it was one of those things where when you're working on it and you think to yourself, is this really, am I that invested in this? Not really. Okay, well then let's just have a little bit of a fun with it. I mean, I do find what is interesting about some of these faces is they do look like this to me looks like the actor Jack Palance, who was a famous Hollywood cowboy, famous for the film City Slickers, and if you recall during the Academy Awards he did a one-handed push-up, and I think he was like 85 at the time. Or it also kind of looks a little bit like what's his name? He played the president in The West Wing. I keep thinking Michael Douglas. It's not Michael Douglas. It is Martin Sheen. It kind of looks. He's got a little Martin Sheen. That's the one who's got the most personality, and he's right there in the middle. So that's kind of cool. I mean, this guy here kind of looks like a Lee Harvey Oswald or something. There's some kind of serial killer quality there, and this little fella sort of blurred in between. These guys have a little bit less personality. So, if I really wanted, I could have invested a lot more time into it. I mean, if we just sort of zoom in. You'll see that this is a little bit blurry. It's because I couldn't find a full high-res image of this. So I did a digital collage of parts of the painting that I could find that were high-res, which are some like the legs and the faces. So let's just sort of look at some legs. And I actually quite like what's happening down here. Like, that is, I think, kind of neat. The way that this just starts looking like marks. And we do see that in here when we get up close. It just starts to blur together. Not so happy with this big kind of dark shape in here, even though that's kind of there. Didn't quite get the nuance in the belt. I guess I do have the belt on here, but as I said, it was interesting to do that process on that one. And then let's just take a look at this one side by side. Definitely a little bit darker. I could have done way more carving inside the shirt in particular, and because remember, everywhere that I didn't carve is going to be black. So this is really still about as black as his jeans, which I think should be much darker. So really I could have carved in and just left one or two very thin lines there. Because I think that now sort of turns this, he almost looks like he's got a kimono on or something, except it, like just the way that looks like a belt, like a, like a jiu-jitsu belt or something with that pocket knife there. Some of these turned out like a little bit better than others, which is exactly how he worked. I could try to do a little bit of painting to quote-unquote fix things, but I'm just going to leave it like that. Let's maybe just zoom in all the way and see how this looks. Let's start at the left. Do that all together at the same time with right and left hand. That's not pretty tricky. Okay. I think I might let's just look at it a little bit closer like that Full screen. I mean, if anything, it starts to kind of look like a little bit like the Joker or something. The way that those eyes and those really big, the mouth kind of seems to open and kind of close, or kind of snarling out the left side of his mouth, or yeah, or the right side of his right or left, right? Or it looks like tears, like a clown makeup. I kind of would have liked for the hair to be a little bit bigger, but again, I'm just going to leave it like that. I could try to paint it a bit, but I think that's fine. Okay, so thank you everyone for painting along with me, drawing along with me, whatever you've been doing along with me. Thank you for spending time along with me. It's been a pleasure trying to do this artwork. We're gonna, on Thursday, we're gonna be doing something kind of quite different. We're gonna be painting Picasso's Guernica. Guernica is one of the most famous paintings of all time. It's a gigantic painting of maybe 25 feet by about 12 feet tall. That's in the Prado, right? In Milan, not Milan, in Madrid. It starts with an M, which I've been to. I've seen it. It's really cool to see it in person. So it's going to be fun to try to do that painting much smaller. We're actually going to use two smaller canvases two of these 9x12 canvases side by side to do that long painting. I'm really excited to do that. The outlines are already in the Dropbox, so if you want to get started doing those outlines, so I've done the outlines, we'll just start right off on Thursday. As well as on Sunday, we're doing a special bonus episode looking at your artwork. So if you have any paintings you want to upload to the Facebook group, including this, do that ASAP so that we can celebrate your achievements. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening or morning, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. And it looks like there's a few of you who are on the other side of the world right now. So I hope the future is going great. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Talk to you all very, very soon. Good night.